My neighbor, let's call her Karen, had a personal vendetta against my truck. For 30 days straight, I found a new parking ticket on my windshield every morning, all for parking in my own driveway. 27 fines. I had enough. I walked over and knocked on her door. "Hi, Karen," I said, trying to stay calm. "Are you the one reporting my truck every day?" She just smirked. "Your vehicle is a commercial eyesore. It violates HOA Policy 714. I couldn't believe it. "It's my work truck, Karen. This is ridiculous." I warned her, "You need to stop this." But she didn't. The fines kept coming. So I decided to play her game. I spent a weekend reading the entire HOA rulebook, all 300 pages of it. And that's when I found it. Section 12.5. All property modifications, including patios and decks, require pre-approval from the Architectural Committee. I remembered the brand new expansive deck she'd just built. I got out my drone, took some pictures confirming it was a good 2 feet over the property line into the common area, and sent a detailed anonymous report to the HOA, citing the specific rule she quoted to me. A week later, I saw the notice on her door. The next day, construction crews were in her backyard, tearing the whole thing down. The HOA fined her for the unapproved structure, the property line violation, and the cost of removal. It was a 5-figure bill. I saw her on her lawn a few days later, looking defeated. This time I was the one to speak. "Looks like HOA policy is tough, isn't it?" All she could do was glare. 4 months later, a "for sale" sign was hammered into her lawn. The sweetest victory I've ever tasted. I bought my dream property years ago. Miles of open fields, a peaceful stream. It was my own private paradise. I spent every spare moment out there just enjoying the quiet. But my neighbor saw it differently. One day he stormed over, face red with fury, accusing me of trespassing. "This part is mine," he yelled. He couldn't stand that I owned so much. I tried to show him the property lines on my deed, the official survey markers. He wouldn't listen. Finally, he did what I never thought he would. He called the police on me on my own land. When the police arrived, the neighbor put on a show, playing the victim. I just calmly presented my documents to the officer and explained the situation. The officer was professional. He checked my papers and looked at his own maps. After a tense silence, he turned to my neighbor and said, "Sir, this man doesn't just own this part. He owns the whole block." The look on my neighbor's face was something I'll never forget. The police left and I was alone again in my hard-earned peace. It was a powerful reminder. Know your rights and stand your ground. Every weekend, my place was the spot for fun. Laughter, music, good times. But not everyone was thrilled. Our neighbor, let's call them Mr. Grumbles, always seemed to have a complaint. A constant shadow over our joy. Then came the calls. The HOA security guards at my door. It was getting ridiculous, but I had an idea. Instead of fighting, I decided to unite. A block party. But not just any party, one for the whole community. I spent days planning, designing invitations, making sure the HOA board was specifically invited. This was strategic. A close-up on an invitation being designed for a block party, prominently mentioning the HOA board. A clear, inviting design. The day arrived and our street transformed. Colorful decorations, delicious food, and music filled the air. Neighbors, old and new, started arriving. Even the HOA board members looking a bit curious at first. But soon smiles spread. They were laughing, chatting, enjoying the vibrant atmosphere. My plan was working. And then I saw Mr. Grumbles. Peeking from his window, a look of utter surprise, maybe even a little confusion. Later, I chatted with the HOA. They were impressed, praising the initiative. The complaints were forgotten. The atmosphere was electric, a true celebration of togetherness. The tension had melted away, replaced by joy. Mr. Grumbles was still watching, but his usual scowl was gone. A flicker of something else, perhaps acceptance. The party continued, a testament to what we could achieve. A strong, happy community built on shared moments. I smiled, looking at the joyful faces. From petty jealousy to community spirit, all thanks to a block party. And Mr. Grumbles? Well, he didn't join, but the complaints stopped. Our street found its harmony. My neighbor was a thief, but I got the last laugh, and it was glorious. It all started with the bills. For months, I was getting these insane electricity statements, one after another. Each one higher than the last. I couldn't figure it out. I was a ghost in my own house, lights off, appliances unplugged, practically living by candlelight. Still, the numbers just kept climbing. I was at my wit's end, convinced my house was haunted by a power-guzzling poltergeist. Then one afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, I saw it. Tucked away behind a bush, almost completely hidden, was a grimy, weather-beaten extension cord plugged into one of my outdoor outlets. I followed it. The cord snaked across the edge of my lawn, a dirty orange line in the grass, and disappeared right into the crack of my neighbor's basement window. The nerve of this guy. Just a week later, I got a notice from the power company. They were upgrading the whole neighborhood to smart meters. As the utility worker installed the sleek new digital meter on my house, a brilliant idea sparked in my mind. This was my chance. That weekend, I put my plan into action. I went down to my breaker panel and, with a satisfying click, flipped the main switch. My entire house plunged into darkness. But in the quiet gloom, I pulled out my phone and opened the power company's new app. There it was in glorious real time, a graph showing my household's electricity usage. Even with my house completely powered down, the graph displayed a steady, undeniable drain of electricity. I grinned and took a screenshot. That was my smoking gun. Armed with irrefutable proof, I called the power company. The next day, I watched from my window as an official knocked on my neighbor's door, tablet in hand. I could see the smug look on my neighbor's face slowly curdle into pure panic as the official showed him the data from my app. The best part, the aftermath. A few weeks later, I saw my neighbor standing on his porch, white as a sheet, staring at a bill from the power company that looked more like a phone book. It was a massive statement for years of back-charged electricity, plus hefty fines. That same day, I opened my own bill. It was the lowest it had been in years. Sweet, sweet justice. This was one of those days where you feel like the universe is personally testing your patience. I had the most important job interview of my life, a final round meeting I'd been working towards for months, and I was running perfectly on time. That is, until I turned onto what I thought was a quiet residential street and hit a wall of celebration. An entire wedding reception, complete with tents, tables, and a dance floor, was sprawled across the public road, completely blocking my path. Frantically checking my watch, I saw my precious buffer time evaporating. I got out and found a man in a tuxedo who looked like he was in charge. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have a critical job interview in 30 minutes and this is the only way through. Is there any way I can pass?" He just laughed. "It's a wedding. We're celebrating here. Just go around, it's not a big deal," he said before turning his back on me. Politeness had failed. I returned to my car, took a deep breath to calm my racing heart, and dialed the non-emergency police line. "Yes, hello," I began. "I'd like to report an entire public street being illegally blocked for a private party." Within minutes, a squad car arrived. The officer calmly took in the scene, and the tuxedoed man's smug attitude vanished as the officer laid out the legal reality of the situation. Suddenly, the party was a flurry of panicked activity. Guests were scrambling to haul tables and chairs onto the sidewalk, clearing a path under the officer's firm gaze. I started my car and drove slowly through the narrow lane they created, ignoring the resentful glares. As I pulled away, I glanced at my watch. I was going to make it just in the nick of time. That's when you learn that sometimes doing the right thing feels an awful lot like a victory lap. When you share a driveway with someone, there are certain unspoken rules. Rule number 1, stay on your side of the line. But my neighbor, with his gigantic SUV, seemed to think that line was merely a suggestion. Every single day I'd come home to find his car creeping over, tires planted firmly in my territory, leaving my spot frustratingly tight. Getting home from work became a daily puzzle. It was a whole routine: pull up, assess the damage, and then begin the careful multi-point turn ballet. I'd inch forward, reverse, crank the wheel, and repeat, sometimes getting out just to make sure I wasn't about to scrape my door against his. It was a ridiculous, nerve-wracking process just to park my own car in my own spot. I tried leaving notes, I tried talking to him, but nothing changed. Then came the breaking point. It was a Friday, I was exhausted, and my passenger seat was loaded with groceries. I pulled in to see his SUV parked at its worst angle yet, practically halfway into my space. I just sighed. But instead of starting the usual parking gymnastics, a sense of calm washed over me. An idea sparked. It was time for some malicious compliance. I backed up, straightened my wheels, and drove perfectly forward, parking my car flawlessly within my own lines. It was a beautiful textbook park job. From a bird's-eye view, my car was perfectly positioned. The problem? With his crooked parking, there was now less than a foot of space between my passenger side and his driver's side door. I went inside, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. The next morning was pure gold. I watched from my window, coffee in hand, as he came out to his car. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the impossibly narrow gap. He tried the handle, but the door wouldn't budge more than a few inches. After a moment of defeated silence, he began the climb of shame. He trudged around to the passenger side, awkwardly clambering inside and scrambling over the center console to get to the driver's seat. I took a slow, quiet sip of my coffee. From that day on, he always parked perfectly within his lines. My neighbor kept leaving their trash on the edge of my property, right where my lawn meets theirs. Every single week, like clockwork, 2 or 3 bags would just appear. I was trying to be a good neighbor, so I figured I'd just ask them about it. I waited until I saw him outside one afternoon and calmly pointed to the bags. He just shrugged his shoulders, said, "Not mine. Must be someone else," and walked right back into his house without another word. The denial was so blunt I was left standing there speechless. After another week of this, I had enough. I decided it was time to play detective. That night, after it was good and dark, I put on a pair of rubber gloves and headed outside. My heart was pounding a little as I cautiously untied one of the mystery bags. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I needed some kind of proof. It didn't take long to find exactly what I was looking for. I started rummaging through the garbage, and right near the top, I pulled out a handful of junk mail and an empty Amazon box. I brought them closer to my porch light for a better look. A huge grin spread across my face as I saw it. A close-up shot revealed my neighbor's name and address printed clearly on every single piece. I had all the evidence I needed. But I decided against another confrontation. Instead of arguing, I simply returned their lost property. I quietly carried the trash bags over to their front porch and stacked them neatly right in front of their door. As a final touch, I placed the shipping box right on top of the pile, with their name and address facing up for them to see. The next morning, my security camera captured the golden moment. My neighbor opened his door, stopped dead in his tracks, and just froze. He looked around furtively, his face bright red with embarrassment, before quickly dragging the bags inside. The trash problem never happened again. They said it wasn't theirs, so I just returned it. What would you have done? I thought I'd found my dream home, but a power-tripping HOA board member turned it into a nightmare. It all began with a blizzard of fines for the most ridiculous things. One week it was a single weed sprouting by my mailbox. The next it was for leaving my trash can out an hour too long. Every single notice was signed by the same person, a woman named Karen. I started to get suspicious. As I walked through the neighborhood, I couldn't help but notice other homes had the exact same violations. There were plenty of weeds and visible trash cans everywhere, yet my door was the only one plastered with fines. It was clear I was being singled out, so I decided to fight back with evidence. I started a dossier, taking time-stamped photos of my property and my neighbors' properties every day for weeks. The pattern was undeniable. I was the sole target. To top it off, I installed a small security camera overlooking my front lawn. That camera caught the smoking gun. The footage showed Karen walking her dog right up to my lawn. She let it do its business and then just walked away without cleaning it up. A moment later, she was back, gleefully writing a fine for pet waste and sticking it to my door. At the next HOA meeting, Karen began her usual speech listing my numerous violations. I calmly waited for my turn, then asked to present something on the projector. The room went silent as I showed side-by-side photos of my fined property versus the untouched neighbors. The grand finale was the security footage of Karen and her dog. The room exploded with gasps and angry whispers. Karen froze, her face turning ghost white as all the fines against me were dropped on the spot. Is what I did wrong? It was 3 a.m. and the only light in the entire office building was the glow from my monitor. Stacks of empty coffee cups stood guard over my keyboard as I put the final touches on the quarterly market analysis. For weeks I had poured everything into this project, weaving together complex data streams and intricate charts into a presentation that was nothing short of a masterpiece. This was my big shot, the project that would finally get me noticed. Just as I was about to save the final version, my boss, Mr. Harrison, strolled past my desk. He gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder, his eyes not even bothering to glance at the screen. "Excellent work, son," he said with a smug grin. "I'll take it from here and present it to the board tomorrow." Just like that, my weeks of sleepless nights were about to become his moment of glory. But not this time. Back at my desk, I prepared the files for him. I created the main PowerPoint, polished and perfect. Then with a quiet click, I moved the crucial Excel file, the one containing all the raw data, the formulas, the very soul of the presentation, to a hidden folder on my personal drive. I copied only the hollowed-out PowerPoint shell onto the USB drive and handed it to him with a polite smile. The next morning, I watched from the back of the boardroom as Harrison stood at the podium, basking in the executive's attention. He breezed through the introductory slides, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. Then he clicked to the most important slide, the financial projections. The screen flashed a glaring "data source not found" error across a blank chart. His confident facade shattered instantly. The key data seems to be missing," he stammered, clicking the mouse frantically as sweat beaded on his forehead. The executives exchanged cold, unimpressed glances while Harrison stood frozen at the podium, exposed and speechless. I watched the scene unfold with a calm, unreadable expression. As his career imploded before my eyes, a single thought echoed in my mind. Did I go too far? My neighbor decided to build a fence, but he took 3 feet of my land in the process. He thought he could get away with it. But I decided to teach him a lesson he would never forget. It all started when I came home to find a brand new wooden fence cutting straight through my perfectly manicured lawn. There it was, a fresh scar on my property, leaving a bizarre 3-foot strip of my grass on his side. I tried to handle it civilly, approaching him with a friendly smile. I pointed out the obvious encroachment, but he just scoffed. "Look straight to me," he said, turning his back on me and ending the conversation right there. His arrogance was infuriating, but I knew arguing was pointless. Since he wouldn't listen to reason, I decided to give him something he couldn't ignore. Proof. I hired a professional surveyor. They came out with all their high-tech gear and, within an hour, had planted a series of bright orange flags and wooden stakes, marking the true property line. Just as I suspected, the fence was a full 3 feet onto my land. The proof was undeniable, hammered right into the ground for all to see. That night, under the cloak of darkness, my plan went into action. With a couple of friends, we carefully and quietly dug up every single fence post. Section by section, we moved the entire structure, reinstalling it perfectly along the new, officially marked survey line. It was hard work, but the thought of his face in the morning kept us going. The next day was priceless. My neighbor stepped out onto his porch, coffee in hand, and just froze. His eyes went from his fence, now perfectly aligned with the survey stakes, to the 3-foot-wide strip of freshly disturbed turf that was now correctly back on my side of the line. His morning calm instantly vanished. He stormed over, red-faced and yelling, but I didn't say a single word. I simply raised my hand and pointed a finger at the bright orange survey stakes still firmly planted in the ground. He stared at the official markers, then back at the fence, the anger draining from his face as defeat set in. He was speechless. Now, when I mow my lawn, I get a special satisfaction from gliding over that reclaimed 3-foot strip, a beautiful patch of green that justice brought back home. My neighbor thought he could get away with stealing my water, but he didn't know I was 1 step ahead of him. It all started when I got my water bill, and the number on it made my jaw drop. It was double what I usually pay. I knew something was off, so I went outside to investigate. The first thing I noticed was my garden hose. It was coiled up, but not the way I leave it. Then I saw it, a small, damp patch on the ground right below the spigot. It hadn't rained in weeks. My suspicion grew, and I decided it was time to get some real answers. To catch the water thief in the act, I ordered a small, hidden security camera online. Once it arrived, I set it up discreetly, pointing it directly at the spigot. I left it recording overnight and checked the footage the next morning. What I saw was infuriating. A time-lapse video clearly showed my neighbor sneaking into my yard in the middle of the night. He carefully uncoiled my hose, connected his own, and proceeded to wash his massive pickup truck for what looked like hours. The sheer nerve of it was unbelievable. He was treating my backyard like his own personal car wash, and I was footing the bill. My first instinct was to confront him, but I knew that would just lead to a messy argument and denial. I wanted undeniable proof, so I came up with a better plan. I went to the hardware store and purchased a digital water flow meter, a small device that attaches directly to the spigot and measures every gallon that passes through it. I screwed it on, making sure the initial reading was a perfect 0,000, and took a clear photo for my records. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for my thirsty neighbor to return. Just as I expected, my hidden camera captured him again a few nights later. He crept into the yard, flashlight in hand, and went straight for the spigot. He fumbled with the new meter for a moment, clearly confused, but then shrugged and connected his hose anyway. He had no idea that the little digital screen was meticulously tracking his every stolen drop. He continued his late-night car washing routine for the rest of the month, blissfully unaware that his secret was being recorded not just on camera, but in gallons. At the end of the month, I went out to check the meter. The number was staggering. It had recorded hundreds of gallons of unauthorized water usage. I filmed myself pulling out a calculator and doing the math, multiplying the total gallons by my local water rate. The final figure was the exact amount I had been overcharged. It was time to settle the score. I designed a professional-looking invoice, complete with a letterhead that read unauthorized water service bill. I detailed the meter readings, the total gallons used, and the final amount due. With the invoice in hand, I walked over to his house and taped it firmly to his front door. A few hours later, I heard him storming out, yelling and waving the paper in his hand. He came marching over, red-faced and furious, but I was ready. I calmly held up my phone and showed him the time-lapse videos. I then pointed to the spigot, showing him a close-up photo of the final meter reading. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a look of complete defeat. Without another word, he pulled out his wallet and paid me in cash. The very next day, I installed a brand new lock on my spigot. My water bills are back to normal, and my neighbor now washes his truck at the local car wash. My neighbor decided my private driveway was the perfect long-term parking spot for his beat-up old truck. It sat there for days, blocking my garage and turning my property into his personal junkyard. I tried being nice at first. I walked over and politely asked him to move it. He just waved a dismissive hand and said he'd get to it later, but later never came. Days turned into weeks, and that rusty heap of metal didn't budge an inch. My patience was officially running on empty, so I hit the books, the local law books to be specific. I spent an evening digging into municipal codes about abandoned vehicles on private property. Armed with knowledge, my next step was to make it official. I printed out bright orange notification stickers, citing the exact statutes he was violating and giving him a clear 15-day deadline to remove the vehicle. I slapped one on the driver's side window and another on the windshield. Predictably, the deadline came and went. The truck, now decorated with my legal warnings, remained exactly where it was. It was time for the final, most satisfying step, the paperwork. I spent an afternoon filling out forms, getting affidavits notarized, and sending a certified package to the DMV to apply for the title under the abandoned vehicle process. It was a bureaucratic headache, but I knew it would be worth it. A few weeks later, a crisp new title arrived in the mail with my name on it. I immediately called a local scrapyard and sold them the truck for a couple $100. The next day, a tow truck arrived. As the chains were being hooked up, my neighbor finally sprinted out of his house, shouting and waving his arms in a panic. I just stood there calmly and held up the new title. The look on his face was priceless as he watched his truck get hauled away for good. Some people just have to learn the hard way.
So I own this empty lot next to an apartment building, just a nice patch of green in the city. A few weeks ago, I noticed one car parked there. I didn't think much of it, maybe a visitor who couldn't find a spot. But then the next day, there were 3. Soon it became a daily thing. Over the next month, my quiet grassy field turned into a free-for-all parking lot. Every morning, it would fill up with dozens of cars from the neighboring complex. They were turning my private land into their personal garage, tearing up the grass and leaving a mess. It was time to put a stop to it. I went out and installed huge, impossible-to-miss signs right at the entrance. No parking, private property, violators will be towed at owner's expense. I thought that would be the end of it. The very next morning, I looked out my window, and the lot was just as packed as ever. Cars were parked right next to my brand new signs, completely ignoring the warning. They clearly didn't take me seriously. That was the final straw. I picked up my phone and made a call. Within an hour, a fleet of tow trucks, at least 10 of them, rolled up and lined up along the street. It looked like an army preparing for battle. The drivers got out, ready to go, and I gave them the signal. What followed was a beautiful, coordinated operation. One by one, the tow trucks moved in, hooking up every single car on my property. They worked quickly and efficiently, lifting cars and hauling them away. In less than an hour, the noisy, crowded lot was transformed. The video ends with a shot of my property, finally empty and peaceful again. The no parking signs now stand guard over a clear field. As evening fell, you could see the car owners wandering around the empty lot, completely confused, searching for the vehicles that were no longer there. Maybe next time they'll read the signs.
My neighbor thought my lawn was his personal construction parking lot. I came home from work to find this giant excavator sitting right on my perfectly manicured grass, tearing it up just by existing. There were deep tread marks already sinking into the soil. I was seeing red. I knew exactly who was responsible. I walked over to my neighbor's place where he was busy supervising some landscaping project. I tried to be calm and just asked him, "Hey, could you please move your machine off my lawn?" He barely looked at me and just waved a hand saying, "Relax, it's not hurting anything. I'll get to it in a day or two." A day or two? My lawn would be completely ruined by then. His dismissive attitude was the final straw. Since he wasn't going to be reasonable, I decided to explore my options. I spent the next hour on the phone. First, I called the city bylaw office, who confirmed that any unauthorized vehicle or equipment on private property could be legally removed at the owner's expense. Then I called a heavy-duty towing company and explained the situation. They told me they could be there within the hour. The plan was set. The arrival of the tow truck was a glorious sight. It was a massive rig, even bigger than the excavator. The operator was a true professional, skillfully maneuvering his truck and attaching thick chains and cables to the construction machine. It was a complex operation, but he handled it with impressive efficiency. I filmed the entire thing, barely able to contain my smile. Just as the tow truck started to pull the excavator off my lawn and onto the street, my neighbor came running out of his house, screaming his head off. He was waving his arms, yelling about how I couldn't do this and how much it was going to cost him. The tow truck driver just ignored him and kept on driving, hauling that big yellow machine down the road and out of sight. The next morning, the view was perfect. I stood on my now empty, albeit slightly damaged front lawn, holding a hot cup of coffee. The silence was golden, the sense of victory was sweet, and my property was finally mine again. Some neighbors just have to learn the hard way.
My neighbor built half his garage on my property, so I cut it in half with a concrete saw. There's no feeling quite like coming home after a long business trip. I pulled into my driveway ready to just collapse on my own couch, but I stopped the car dead. Something was horribly wrong. A brand new monstrous garage was sticking out from my neighbor's house, and its wall was stretched halfway across my lawn, stopping just inches from my living room window. My jaw literally dropped. I found my neighbor standing there, puffing his chest out and admiring his handiwork. When I asked him what on earth he thought he was doing, he just shrugged. He said the space looked empty and that I wasn't using it anyway, so he decided it was his for the taking. He completely dismissed my protests, acting like my property deed was just a suggestion. That's when I decided I was done being the nice guy. I hired a professional surveyor the very next day. They came out and planted a line of bright orange flags, marking the official property line. As I suspected, the flags ran straight through the exact center of his brand new garage. The proof was undeniable, but even then, he refused to do anything about it. So I made one more call. A week later, a demolition crew showed up with the biggest concrete saw I had ever seen. While my neighbor watched with his jaw on the floor, they fired it up and meticulously sliced his precious garage perfectly in half, right along the property line. The crew hauled away the debris from my side, leaving him with a bizarre, perfectly bisected structure. He just stood there staring at the ruin of his project while my lawn was finally clear. Some people have to learn about boundaries the hard way, and I guess for him, that lesson came with a hefty price tag and half a garage. I just got back from a 2-week vacation, and all I wanted was to crash on my own couch. But as I pulled into my driveway, I slammed on the brakes. My neighbor had built a garage, a huge, ugly 2-car garage, and it was sitting halfway across my front lawn, so close I could probably touch it from my living room window. I found my neighbor, let's call him Kevin, standing there admiring his new monstrosity. I asked him what on earth he thought he was doing. He just shrugged and said, "That part of your lawn looked like you weren't using it, so I did." He actually told me to my face that he'd taken my land because it looked unused. That was the last straw. I called a property surveyor the very next day. A few hours and a few $100s later, my lawn was decorated with a line of bright pink flags. They ran from the sidewalk, straight through the middle of Kevin's brand new garage, and all the way to the back of my property. The proof was undeniable. I gave Kevin a week to remove his structure from my property. He just laughed, So I did what any reasonable person would do. I hired a demolition crew. They came with the biggest concrete saw I had ever seen. The noise was glorious, and watching them slice that garage perfectly in half along the property line was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. Now my lawn is clear, and Kevin is the proud owner of half a garage. He just stands on his porch and stares at the perfectly cut cross-section of his own stupidity. Sometimes, when a neighbor crosses the line, you just have to draw a new one with a concrete saw.
A rancher found himself in a legal battle after his homeowners association paved his private road without his consent and then tried to bill him for it. His long dirt driveway, a familiar comfort after any trip, was now a strip of black asphalt, a sight so jarring it forced him to stop his dusty pickup truck in sheer disbelief. He had just returned from a cattle auction, expecting the familiar bump and grind of his rural road, not this smooth foreign surface stretching all the way to his property. Stepping out of the truck, the rancher's boots met the pristine blacktop with a soft thud that felt entirely out of place. He ran his hand over the surface, still warm from the sun, his mind racing. Just then, a gleaming luxury sedan pulled up. A woman in a sharp business suit, the HOA president, emerged with a self-satisfied smile. She gestured grandly at the road, her expression one of misplaced pride, as if she had just bestowed a great gift upon him. "A little community enhancement," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. She then handed him a crisp envelope containing a bill for an amount that made his eyes widen in anger. The rancher's disbelief quickly turned to fury. He explained, his voice low and steady, that this was his private road, not a community path. He informed her that she and her contractors were trespassing and that he had no intention of paying for a project he never authorized. Days later, the rancher's solution was clear and unmistakable. A massive, wrought-iron gate now stood at the entrance of the newly paved driveway, flanked by a large, bold sign that read, "Private property. No trespassing." This expensive, unrequested road had effectively been cut off from the very community that had forced it upon him. The final scene captured the HOA president, her face a mask of frustration, staring at the imposing barrier from her car, utterly defeated.
There are some things in life you just don't mess with. A man's truck, his dog, and the road that leads him home. For years, that road for me was a stretch of good, honest dirt, winding through the heart of my ranch like a lifeline. Every evening, I'd watch the setting sun paint the dust kicked up by my old Ford, a perfect end to a hard day's work. It wasn't just a road, it was a part of this place, a part of me. Then one day I came home to a nightmare. The familiar brown earth was gone, smothered under a blanket of sterile black asphalt. My road, my beautiful rustic road, had been paved over. It looked like a scar on the landscape, an unnatural intrusion that screamed of city life, not country soul. Disbelief turned to a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Sure enough, a smug-looking fella from the new homeowners association was there, clipboard in hand, beaming like he'd just saved the world. He called it an improvement, a value add. I told him he'd ripped the heart out of my property. He just shrugged, pointing to some fine print in a rule book I'd never seen. He didn't understand he couldn't understand? This wasn't about property value. It was about preserving a way of life. So I did what any rancher would do. I fought back. The next morning I fired up my John Deere, the one with the ripper attachment. The first crack in that pristine asphalt was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I spent the day tearing it up piece by piece, reclaiming what was mine. It was hard work, but every chunk of broken pavement felt like a victory. Now the road is dirt again. The HOA sent letters, but they haven't sent another paving crew. As I drive home, kicking up that familiar gentle dust, I pass a monument to my little rebellion. A growing pile of broken asphalt by the fence. Some things are worth fighting for, and my road is one of them. He thought his sprawling empty field was a slice of paradise, a quiet escape from the bustle of his suburban neighborhood. But his tranquil view was soon ruined. One by one, sleek modern cars began to appear, turning his private land into a convenient, free-for-all parking lot. Despite the prominent no trespassing signs he had posted, his new neighbors seemed to believe the space was theirs for the taking. When he finally confronted the drivers, he was met with shocking entitlement. "It's just an empty field," one scoffed, while another argued it was more convenient than their own driveways. The situation escalated when the HOA president, siding with the trespassers, brazenly handed him a violation notice for improperly maintained land, citing the tire tracks left by the unwanted cars. The landowner knew that simply arguing was pointless. He needed a solution they couldn't ignore. The next morning, a new, much larger sign stood at the entrance to his field. Bold letters declared, "Paid parking 50 hour. All proceeds fund future landscaping." Beside it, he set up a small payment booth, complete with a cash box and a credit card reader. He sat back, waiting for his entitled neighbors to arrive, a small smile playing on his lips. As expected, the car owners pulled up, their jaws dropping at the sight of the new arrangement. Outrage and disbelief filled the air as they read the sign, honking their horns in protest. One by one, they reversed their cars and drove away, searching for another free spot. The landowner watched them go, finally enjoying the sight of his peaceful, empty field, the quiet once again his own.
He had spent his whole life working on this land, a sprawling ranch passed down through generations. But one morning, as the sun cast a golden glow over the rolling hills, he discovered something new. A narrow path, clearly man-made, wound its way through his best grazing pasture. Small, hand-painted signs with cheerful arrows pointed the way, as if it were an official park trail. He hadn't authorized this. His heart sank as he realized his private sanctuary had been invaded. Days later, he found them, a group of hikers chatting loudly as they strolled along the unauthorized path. He rode up, pointing to the numerous private property signs posted along his fence line. He explained that they were trespassing, that his cattle needed this land undisturbed. The hikers were dismissive, arguing it was a community path and that the beautiful scenery should be for everyone. Their sense of entitlement was infuriating. His calls to local authorities went nowhere. The issue was deemed a civil matter. If no one else would protect his land, he would. He spent the next weekend in his workshop, the bright flash of a welding torch illuminating his determined face. He wasn't just building a gate, he was forging a statement. With sweat and steel, he constructed a heavy-duty barrier, sinking the thick posts deep into the earth and securing them with concrete. The next time the hikers arrived for their morning walk, they were met with an impassable wall of steel. Multiple professionally printed "no trespassing" signs were bolted firmly to the bars. Their community path was gone. From a nearby ridge, the rancher watched on horseback as his cattle grazed peacefully, the morning quiet and still once more. He had taken back his land, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his peace.
This had to stop. For weeks, I'd wake up to find my lawn, which I spend every weekend maintaining, littered with someone else's garbage. I had my suspicions, but I needed proof. It was a matter of principle. My home is my sanctuary, and someone was disrespecting it night after night. I wasn't going to let it slide. This wasn't just about trash, it was about the peace of my own home being disturbed, and I was determined to find a solution. So I decided to take action. I installed a small high-definition security camera, positioning it discreetly under the eaves of my roof. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of my entire front yard. The setup was simple, and the app on my phone gave me a live feed. Now all I had to do was wait. I knew it was only a matter of time before the culprit would return, and this time I would be ready to catch them red-handed, or at least digitally. That very night, my plan paid off. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. On the screen, I watched in disbelief as my own neighbor crept across the lawn under the cover of darkness. The camera's night vision was crystal clear, capturing him as he casually dropped a bag of trash right in the middle of my perfectly manicured grass. The evidence was undeniable, recorded in high-definition video. It was all there, plain as day. The next morning, tablet in hand, I walked over to his house. I didn't raise my voice, I simply showed him the footage from the night before. His face went pale as he watched himself on the screen. There was no room for denial, no excuses he could make. The clear, indisputable video evidence left him stunned and utterly embarrassed. He mumbled an apology, unable to even look me in the eye. Things are quiet now. My lawn is back to its pristine state, free of any unwanted garbage. Every morning I look out my window and see nothing but green grass. I haven't had a single issue since that day. Sometimes a little bit of technology is all you need to solve a problem and restore peace. This billionaire decided to disguise himself as a homeless man to test the staff at his own hotel. He shuffled towards the grand entrance, his face weathered and his clothes tattered, hoping to find a glimmer of kindness. The opulent lobby, with its sparkling chandeliers and polished marble floors, stood in stark contrast to his humble appearance. He just wanted to see who would treat him with basic human decency. As he reached for the gleaming glass doors, a sharp-dressed receptionist and a stern-looking concierge immediately stepped out to block his path. This isn't a shelter, the concierge sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. The receptionist laughed cruelly, waving a dismissive hand. Get lost, beggar, she said, shoving him backward. Humiliated and heartbroken by their cruelty, the billionaire retreated from the grand entrance, their mocking laughter echoing in his ears. Dejected, he slumped onto a nearby public bench, the weight of their judgment heavy on his shoulders. Just then, a young hotel cleaner noticed his distress. She approached him quietly, not with scorn, but with compassion in her eyes. Without a word, she offered him a bottle of fresh water and, with a gentle smile, pointed towards a more comfortable, shaded seat away from the harsh sun. Her simple act of kindness was a beacon of light in his moment of despair. The very next day, a gleaming limousine pulled up to the hotel. The billionaire stepped out, now dressed in a perfectly tailored suit exuding an aura of power and authority. He strode past the now gaping receptionist and concierge, their faces pale with shock and fear. He walked directly to the young cleaner who had shown him kindness and, in front of the entire stunned staff, he made an announcement. You, he said, his voice firm, showed true character. I am the owner of this hotel, and I am promoting you to be the new manager.
When this Army veteran's neighbor started mocking his old fence, he had no idea the lesson he was about to learn. What began as a simple property line dispute ended in a moment of pure, silent victory that no one saw coming. It all started on a quiet afternoon. The veteran was tending to his garden, a peaceful ritual he'd cherished since returning home. His fence, weathered by years of sun and rain, stood humbly between his property and his neighbor's. Suddenly a voice cut through the air. His neighbor, leaning over the fence with a smug grin, began pointing and laughing. He mocked its rickety state, suggesting the veteran couldn't even afford a proper boundary. The veteran simply continued his work, his face a mask of calm composure. Later that evening, the veteran sat at his computer, carefully reviewing official property documents. A small, determined smile played on his lips as he cross-referenced old deeds and city plans. He then picked up the phone and made a single decisive call. There would be no shouting match, no angry confrontation. His plan was already in motion, and it was far more precise. The next morning, city surveyors arrived. The neighbor watched from his window, a look of bewilderment spreading across his face as they began meticulously measuring the land between the two houses. He came outside, arms crossed, demanding to know what was happening. The surveyors ignored him, focused on their instruments and calculations. The tension was palpable. Finally, a surveyor drove a small marker into the ground, revealing the undeniable truth. The old fence wasn't just on the veteran's property, it was perfectly placed. In fact, the official survey map showed the neighbor's own prized flower bed was encroaching by nearly a foot. The neighbor stood frozen, his face a mixture of shock and utter embarrassment. The veteran, who had been watching from his porch, gave a slow, knowing nod. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. He then turned his gaze back to his old, humble fence, which now stood as a quiet symbol of integrity and justice. And in that moment, it was clear who had truly won.
So there I was, minding my own business, when my neighbor started pointing and yelling about the fence. He claimed it was 3 feet over his property line and demanded I tear it down immediately. His face was turning an unflattering shade of purple, and honestly, I was just trying to enjoy my Saturday morning coffee. But no, according to him, I was a land thief, a suburban pirate encroaching on his precious territory. I tried to reason with him, but it was like talking to a brick wall, a very loud, very angry brick wall. Things escalated quickly from there. A few days later, a certified letter from the city arrived. It was a formal complaint, citing my illegal fence and threatening fines if I didn't comply. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. That evening, I cleared off my dining room table and unrolled the official property map from when I bought the house. The sprawling paper covered the entire surface, a complex web of lines and measurements that held the key to this whole ridiculous dispute. With a ruler and a magnifying glass, I started tracing the lines, my heart pounding a little faster with each inch. My finger moved slowly along the documented boundary between our properties. And then I saw it. The line didn't just prove my fence was in the right place. It showed that his award-winning rose garden, his pride and joy, was sitting squarely on my land. A slow smile spread across my face. The next weekend, I hired a crew. We didn't tear down the old fence. We built a new one, perfectly aligned with the surveyor's marks enclosing my new garden. Now, instead of yelling, my neighbor just stares out his window with a look of pure defeat. He watches me enjoying a lemonade right next to his former prize-winning roses. It's amazing how a little bit of research and a few feet of wood can bring so much peace and quiet.
I never thought I'd be filming this, but you have to see what's happening outside my neighborhood right now. It's just past midnight, completely silent, and this massive dark-colored truck is just sitting here, completely blocking the main gate. There's no driver in sight, and the engine is off. It's a ghost parked right where everyone needs to get in and out. The silence is the most unsettling part. It's like the truck just appeared out of thin air. I've never seen a vehicle this large get so close to our entrance before, and it feels deliberately placed. I'm getting a bit closer now, phone in hand. It's even more intimidating up close. The sides are completely unmarked. No company logo, no license plate I can see, nothing. Just smooth, dark metal that seems to absorb the dim streetlights. The cab is tinted so dark you can't see a thing inside, and the wheels are enormous, built for something much tougher than these quiet suburban streets. I'm walking around it, but there's no sign of who it belongs to or why it's here. Every instinct is telling me to back away, that I'm not supposed to be this close to whatever this is. Just as I was about to call the police, the headlights flashed on with blinding intensity, throwing my own shadow long and distorted behind me. My heart nearly stopped. Then a deep guttural roar erupted as the engine turned over, the ground vibrating under my feet and shaking my camera. The sound was deafening, a powerful mechanical growl that shattered the midnight quiet. It felt like a warning, a sudden surge of life from this colossal machine that had been playing dead just moments before. And then just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The truck began to move, its huge frame pulling away from the gate with a slow, deliberate grace. I watched its red taillights shrink into the distance, two fading embers swallowed by the darkness. It left the gate wide open, an invitation into the night. Now it's quiet again, and I'm just standing here alone in the middle of the road wondering what in the world I just witnessed. I feel like I've just seen something I wasn't meant to see, and I can't shake the feeling that this is far from over.
The small town of Meadow Creek was known for its peaceful, tree-lined streets and the beautiful, dense forest that bordered the community. For years, residents had cherished the walking trails, finding a quiet escape just steps from their homes. It was a place where families picnicked, children played, and neighbors bonded over a shared love for nature. But one morning, everything changed. A stark, imposing sign was hammered into the ground at the main trailhead. No trespassing. By order of the Meadow Creek Ho. Confusion quickly turned to frustration. Residents like David, who walked his dog there every day, were left bewildered by the sudden and unexplained ban. The HOA's official reason was vague, citing unspecified safety concerns. David, however, was not convinced. The secrecy surrounding the decision felt wrong. Driven by suspicion, he decided to do some investigating of his own. Under the cover of darkness, he explored the perimeter of the woods and discovered a faint, hidden path leading deeper into the trees. Following it, he found survey markers and documents tucked away, revealing a secret deal. The HOA president, Mrs. Reed, had been negotiating to sell a large portion of the forest to a commercial developer. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Reed stood firm, repeating her claims about safety and the need to protect the community. But David was ready. He stood up and presented the photos of the survey markers and copies of the land deal contract. The room erupted in shock and anger as the residents realized they had been deceived. The community's outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Faced with a unified front of angry homeowners, the HOA had no choice but to back down. The deal was cancelled, and Mrs. Reed resigned in disgrace. A few days later, the no trespassing sign was torn down. The final scene was one of pure joy, as the residents of Meadow Creek, David among them, celebrated their victory by walking together, once again free to enjoy the woods they had fought so hard to save.
My HOA president, Mr. Henderson, was a tyrant in khakis. He'd measure your lawn with a ruler, fine you if your garbage can lid was open 1/4 of an inch, and generally patrol our neighborhood like it was his personal fiefdom. We all tolerated him because, well, what choice did we have? But his reign of terror was about to come to a very sudden, very strange end. I woke up one Tuesday to the flash of yellow lights. Outside, city trucks were parked in front of Henderson's perfect house. Men in full hazmat suits were swarming his property, focused on the external entrance to his basement. They were mixing concrete, hauling steel plates, and working with an unnerving efficiency. It looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Henderson himself was on his pristine lawn, practically vibrating with rage. He was shouting at the crew leader, who just calmly handed him a clipboard, shook his head, and walked away. Within an hour, the basement door was completely sealed with concrete and steel. The crew slapped huge biohazard do not enter signs over their work and drove off, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The neighborhood was electric with speculation. Was it a meth lab? A secret government experiment? Henderson wasn't talking. He locked himself inside, only visible as a frantic silhouette peering through his blinds at the monument of shame on his own property. Driven by a need for answers, I spent the night digging through city records online. It didn't take long to find it. A freshly filed emergency environmental order against Henderson's address. The truth was far more mundane, yet just as toxic. Years ago, Henderson had owned a chemical supply business that failed. Instead of properly disposing of the leftover hazardous waste, he had sealed the barrels in his basement. An anonymous tip had led to a secret inspection, which revealed the barrels were leaking, seeping poison into the soil and threatening the entire neighborhood's groundwater. The fallout was swift. A few days later, Henderson was served with a stack of legal papers, his face pale and defeated. He was unceremoniously stripped of his HOA title. His house, once a symbol of rigid order, now bore a permanent ugly scar, a concrete tomb for the toxic secret he tried to bury, and a fitting end for a neighborhood tyrant. I always felt a strange dip in my backyard. One Saturday, I decided to investigate. Underneath a century of neglect, I found it, a hand-carved stone cap. It was an old well. My curiosity got the better of me, but as soon as I tried to open it, my HOA president, Mr. Henderson, was on me like a hawk. He said it was a safety violation and against regulations to open it. His reaction was odd, overly aggressive. So I did some digging. It turns out my property wasn't just on a well, it was on the original town spring, with documented water rights that predated the entire neighborhood. I wasn't just going to pry it open. I was going to restore it properly. I hired a professional crew. The moment the truck arrived, I could feel my neighbor's stare burning a hole through my window. When the cap came off, we sent a camera down. We found crystal clear water, and something else. A professionally installed but clearly illegal pipe, diverting a steady stream of water directly toward Henderson's prize-winning and always suspiciously green rose garden. He'd been stealing my water for years, using the HOA to scare me away from his secret. Now the city is dealing with him, and I've got the freshest water in the state. And the best part? It's all perfectly within the rules.
The HOA president, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the tense silence of the community hall. He announced an immediate and indefinite ban on entering the Miller house, citing vague, unforeseen circumstances and safety concerns. A wave of confused whispers rippled through the room as residents exchanged uneasy glances. The Miller house, a property that had been vacant for months, was now officially off limits. Days turned into weeks and the Miller house stood isolated, its windows boarded up and bright yellow warning signs plastered across the front. I tried to corner Mr. Harrison for more information, but he was curt and evasive, muttering about privacy and ongoing assessments. My neighbors gathered on their lawns, their conversations hushed, speculating about everything from a squatter situation to something far more sinister. The secrecy only fueled my suspicion that something was deeply wrong. Unable to let it go, I started digging. A chat with a former contractor who had worked in the neighborhood led me to a crucial detail. He mentioned a permit filed months ago for specialized structural reinforcement at the Miller house, which seemed odd for an empty home. This piece of information didn't align with the story the HOA was spinning, and it solidified my resolve to find out what was really going on inside. That night, driven by a gut feeling that our community was in danger, I found a partially unlatched window at the back of the Miller house. Slipping inside, the air was thick and heavy with a strange, musty odor. The silence was absolute. As I moved through the dark rooms, I noticed faint, dark stains creeping up the walls, almost like grotesque shadows in the dim light. I pulled out my phone, its flashlight cutting a sharp beam through the oppressive darkness. I pointed it at the nearest wall and my breath caught in my throat. The surface was covered in a sprawling, grotesque black mold, pulsating and alive, far more extensive than anything I had ever seen. The air was so thick it felt hard to breathe. I quickly snapped photos and took a video, my hands shaking. At the next HOA meeting, I didn't wait to be called upon. I projected the images onto the screen for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room as the horrific extent of the mold outbreak was revealed. Mr. Harrison's face went pale, and he stammered weak denials, but the evidence was undeniable. The residents were furious. Cornered and panicked, Mr. Harrison finally confessed. The HOA had known about the severe hazardous mold for months, but had concealed it to avoid widespread panic and a crash in our property values. The room erupted in an uproar. The trust between the board and the community shattered in an instant. Now the Miller house is wrapped in biohazard tape, awaiting a professional remediation team. The HOA is facing a crisis, and while I never set out to be a hero, exposing the truth was the only way to protect our families. Our neighborhood learned a hard lesson. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep. In his lavish office, the CEO of Taste of Heaven restaurants, Mr. Harrison, stared grimly at a report detailing a slump in customer satisfaction. He couldn't understand why, with millions invested, the quality was so inconsistent. Determined to find the truth, he decided to go undercover. Swapping his expensive suit for a simple t-shirt and jeans, he transformed into an ordinary customer, ready to see his business through their eyes. His first stop was a disaster. The restaurant was grimy with dirty tables and a sticky floor. He waited in line for over 15 minutes while the manager, oblivious, scrolled through his phone. When his food finally arrived, it was cold and sloppily thrown together. Mr. Harrison took a single disappointing bite, his heart sinking with the realization of how far his standards had fallen. Hoping for a different experience, he drove to another franchise across town. The difference was night and day. The place was immaculate and buzzed with efficiency. A bright-eyed employee named Sarah greeted him with a genuine smile, patiently walked him through the menu, and delivered a hot, perfectly presented meal. Impressed by her dedication, Mr. Harrison left a $100 tip, his faith in his company slowly returning. The next day, Mr. Harrison returned to the first franchise, this time in his sharp business suit. The manager still lounging with his phone froze in shock as he recognized the CEO. Mr. Harrison calmly listed every failure he had witnessed, from the filthy tables to the cold food. The manager's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Later, Mr. Harrison visited Sarah during her shift. He introduced himself and her jaw dropped. He praised her exceptional service and, right there on the spot, promoted her to a new role as a regional training manager, tasked with bringing her high standards to every location. Overwhelmed, Sarah burst into tears of joy. The bad manager was fired, and the company's future was placed in the hands of those who truly cared. This story begins with a simple act of home maintenance, but like many tales involving a homeowners association, it quickly spiraled into a cautionary lesson about unintended consequences. It all started on a sunny Saturday, when one homeowner decided to patch a small, insignificant crack in his driveway. Before he could even finish, a stern-faced HOA board member appeared, clipboard in hand, to inform him of a brand new rule. All driveway repairs were now strictly forbidden. The homeowner was left standing there, a mix of frustration and disbelief on his face as the board member marched away. At the next HOA meeting, the board proudly unveiled their aesthetic uniformity policy, dismissing residents' worries about maintenance with unwavering confidence in their own authority. They believed a blanket ban was the simplest way to maintain a pristine look. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood's pristine look began to crumble. Those tiny, forbidden-to-fix cracks grew into small potholes, which then widened into gaping craters. A montage of daily life showed cars swerving awkwardly, and drivers grumbling under their breath. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Driveways became obstacle courses of deep, unavoidable potholes, especially treacherous after a rainfall. The audible groans of car suspensions became the new soundtrack of the community, a constant reminder of the board's short-sighted decree. The irony, however, was just beginning to unfold. The focus soon shifted to the very architects of this policy. One board member was seen wincing as his luxury sedan slammed into a particularly nasty pothole he had unknowingly helped create. Another was spotted by the roadside, staring in dismay at a freshly flattened tire. Their expressions, once so confident, now mirrored the annoyance and concern of the residents they had ignored. Soon the board members were complaining to each other about expensive car repair bills and the sudden decline in the neighborhood's appearance, seemingly oblivious to their own role in the fiasco. Through it all, the original homeowner watched the poetic justice play out with a quiet, knowing smile. He wasn't gloating, but there was a certain satisfaction in seeing the problem come full circle. At a subsequent meeting, the board discussed the unforeseen crisis of damaged driveways, proposing a costly community-wide repair fund to fix the mess they had manufactured. The homeowner remained silent, letting them grapple with the consequences of their own making. The final scene showed the still damaged driveways, a testament to the real cost of their ill-conceived rule, leaving the board members to face the very problem they thought they had solved. This entire episode serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most well-intentioned rules can backfire spectacularly, proving that a little common sense can go a lot further than a thick rulebook. A man named Frank was just trying to enjoy his weekend, grilling in his yard and listening to some classic rock. His neighbors, however, seemed to have an issue with his good time, casting annoyed glances over the fence. Frank tried to ignore them, assuming it was just a minor disagreement over musical taste. His peaceful weekend came to a crashing halt when an official letter from the Homeowners Association arrived. The letter cited noise complaints demanding he cease playing music in his own yard. As Frank read the notice with disbelief, he caught his neighbors smirking triumphantly from their window. It was clear they were behind this. At the next HOA meeting, Frank felt completely cornered. The HOA representative sided with his neighbors, who dramatically described his music as a public disturbance. Despite his arguments, the board issued him a formal warning, leaving Frank feeling utterly defeated and unfairly targeted by the very organization meant to serve the community. But Frank wasn't one to give up. Fueled by frustration, he started digging into the HOA's records. That's when he found it. A budget report detailing a large expenditure for a community-wide sound system. An idea began to form, and a sly grin spread across his face. He had a plan. In a surprising turn of events, the HOA decided to auction off the underutilized sound system to recoup costs. Frank was there, ready to bid. He won it for a steal and spent the next weekend installing the high-end speakers all around his own property. His neighbors watched, confused but intrigued. Soon the tables turned dramatically. The neighbors started complaining to the HOA about the lack of ambient music during community events. Frank, meanwhile, enjoyed the newfound peace, either sitting in silence or playing his own music at a perfectly reasonable volume, calmly ignoring their exasperated glares. Frank's revenge was subtle but sweet. He programmed his new sound system to play gentle, calming music at inconvenient times. Early morning bird songs would wake his neighbors, and soft classical music would provide the soundtrack to their evening parties. Their complaints to the HOA were useless, as the system was now private property. Now Frank sips his morning coffee in his perfectly peaceful yard, a look of pure satisfaction on his face. The neighborhood is quiet, but the silent, defeated glares from next door tell him his message was received loud and clear. He had not only won, but had orchestrated his victory beautifully. My neighbor thought he owned the street, especially the part right in front of my driveway. Every single day, his beat-up sedan was there, blocking me in. I was late for work. I missed a doctor's appointment, and hauling groceries from half a block away became my new workout. My frustration grew with each passing day as I stared at his car, a monument to his entitlement, trapping me in my own home. I tried being the good neighbor first. I left a polite note on his windshield, which he promptly threw on the ground. I tried talking to him face to face, but he just gave me a smug smirk and a dismissive shrug before walking away. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he clearly didn't care. That's when I decided I was done playing nice. After a quick call to the city confirmed my rights, I made another call, this time to a local towing company. Watching that first tow truck hook up his car was pure satisfaction. He came running out, his face a perfect picture of shock and outrage, yelling as his precious car was hauled away. I just smiled and waved. You'd think he would have learned his lesson, but no. The very next day, his car was back. So I had it towed again, and again. A hilarious cycle began. A counter on the screen ticked up with each tow. Number 3, 11, or 19. Another counter showed his mounting fees. $500, $2,500, $6,000. He was funding the tow company's holiday party at this point. The grand finale came at tow 27. I watched from my window as he stood on the curb, staring at a stack of impound lot bills completely broken. He was screaming at the sky, a man defeated by his own arrogance and a tow truck. Now my driveway is always clear. I come and go as I please, a sweet, sweet taste of victory with every trip. As for my neighbor, he parks so far down the street now I practically need binoculars to see his car. He finally learned that my driveway isn't a parking spot. Life with my girls was simple, just me and my little flock clucking away in our backyard haven. Every morning felt like a scene from a storybook, scattering feed and listening to their happy chirps. They weren't just pets, they were part of the family, each with her own quirky personality. That idyllic peace, however, was about to be shattered by a single piece of paper. The letter arrived like an omen, stark white with the Homeowner Association's logo stamped at the top. The words were cold and clinical. All poultry, including chickens, are strictly prohibited. My heart sank as I watched the HOA representative, a stern-faced woman with a clipboard, eyeing my coop from the sidewalk. The message was clear: my girls had to go. For days I was adrift in a sea of sadness. The thought of giving them up was unbearable. Then, scrolling through endless forums late one night, a glimmer of hope appeared. A single phrase caught my eye: emotional support animal. A plan began to form, a brilliant, feathered, and slightly audacious plan. It was a long shot, but I had to try. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and purpose. I went through the official channels, securing a legitimate letter from a licensed mental health professional. I even staged a mock therapy session, complete with a tiny couch where my most stoic hen, Henrietta, listened intently to my woes. It was a ridiculous yet necessary step in my mission to save my flock. The day of reckoning came when the HOA representative returned, a triumphant glint in her eye. She marched up my driveway, clipboard at the ready, clearly expecting an empty coop. I met her at the door, calm and prepared. With a polite smile, I handed her the official documentation, the letter that legally designated my chickens as emotional support animals. Her face was a masterpiece of disbelief turning into frustration. She was speechless, defeated by the very regulations she loved to enforce. Now my girls are safe, legally protected members of the household. And as I sit here with Henrietta perched on my shoulder, I can't help but smile. We didn't just win. We proved that sometimes the most unconventional family is the one that truly heals the heart. My perfectly normal green lawn was my pride and joy, at least until the HOA enforcer showed up. Picture this: a woman in a visor meticulously measuring a single blade of grass with a tiny ruler, then handing me a violation notice with a triumphant smirk. I stared at the paper in disbelief. The official violation: grass exceeds height regulations by 1 inch. Seriously, 1 single inch. That night I decided that if they were going to play by the book, so was I. Fueled by coffee and a healthy dose of spite, I spent hours poring over the HOA's ridiculously thick rulebook, magnifying glass in hand. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes landed on a sentence buried deep within the landscaping section. A loophole, a glorious, beautiful loophole. Artificial turf, it read, is permitted and has no color restrictions. A wicked smile spread across my face as I highlighted the text. The game was on. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to the sound of machinery. A team of workers descended upon my property, tearing up every last blade of my offending green lawn. Then came the main event: massive rolls of the most shocking, vibrant, eye-watering purple artificial turf you have ever seen. The installation was a beautiful, chaotic montage of purple perfection. The final result was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. My entire front yard was now a brilliant sea of purple, an impossible jewel sitting in a sea of identical, HOA-approved green lawns. It was glorious. The best part was the look on the enforcer's face. She stood on the sidewalk, mouth agape, her clipboard and ruler hanging limply at her side, utterly powerless. From my perfectly manicured and perfectly legal purple paradise, I gave her a cheerful wave and a bright smile. Checkmate. So I got into a fight with my HOA, and things got a little out of hand. It all started on a perfect, quiet evening. I was just chilling by my tiny fire pit in the backyard, minding my own business. Suddenly, the HOA president, Karen, materializes out of the shadows. She slaps a piece of paper into my hand, a whopping $4,000 fine for my unapproved fire pit. Apparently, my small circle of bricks was a major violation. Instead of just writing a check, a brilliant, petty idea sparked in my mind. The next day, construction began. A montage would show my backyard turning into a full-blown construction zone. We're talking cement mixers, lumber deliveries, and confused neighbors peering over the fence. The tiny fire pit was gone, and something much, much bigger was taking its place. The grand reveal? My backyard was now home to a massive, state-of-the-art outdoor kitchen. It was completely up to code and HOA approved, featuring a huge gas grill, a professional-grade smoker, and even a brick pizza oven. It was beautiful, it was glorious, and it was 100% legal. My revenge was served hot and smoky. Every single weekend I started hosting enormous block parties. The entire neighborhood was invited. The air, once quiet, was now constantly filled with the irresistible smell of slow-cooked barbecue and the sounds of laughter and music. My house quickly became the most popular spot on the block. The final shot is pure gold. Karen, the HOA president, is just staring out her window, her face a perfect mask of misery. She's trapped, forced to smell the delicious feast she has absolutely no power to stop. Meanwhile, I'm at the grill, triumphantly plating up a rack of perfectly smoked ribs for my happy, cheering neighbors. And that's how I turned a $4,000 fine into a legendary neighborhood BBQ. I will never forget the day I received a $25,000 fine from my HOA, all because I tried to protect my home. My story began in the aftermath of a devastating hurricane. The storm had ripped through our neighborhood, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. My own roof was a casualty, torn apart by the ferocious winds, leaving my family exposed and vulnerable. I decided I would never let that happen again. I invested in a state-of-the-art metal roof, designed to withstand the very worst nature could throw at it. The installation was a symbol of resilience, a promise of security for my family. My sense of security was short-lived. A crisp white envelope arrived from the Homeowners Association. Inside, a letter coldly informed me that my new life-saving roof violated their architectural guidelines. The penalty was a staggering $25,000 fine. I was shocked and furious. How could they punish me for protecting my home after a natural disaster? I refused to accept their verdict. That night, I armed myself with coffee and began my own investigation, digging through decades of dusty HOA bylaws and archaic rulebooks. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes landed on a clause buried deep within a 1989 addendum. It was a forgotten rule, passed after another major storm decades ago. The text was crystal clear. In the event of a federally declared natural disaster, homeowners are permitted to install metal roofing for enhanced structural protection. It was my silver bullet. At the next board meeting, I presented my findings. The board members, initially smug and dismissive, fell silent as they read the rule. Their expressions shifted from arrogance to disbelief, and finally to utter defeat. The victory was swift and absolute. A few days later, another letter arrived. Not only was the $25,000 fine completely revoked, but the HOA, humbled by their oversight, agreed to cover the full cost of my new roof and other storm-related damages. Now I stand on my porch, coffee in hand, looking at my strong, secure home. The sense of peace is indescribable. This wasn't just about a roof, it was about standing up for what's right. And that's a victory worth fighting for. When this couple moved into their dream home, they didn't expect their new neighbor to be part of the package deal. But there she was. Day after day, she'd peek over the shared fence, her binoculars a constant fixture at her window, turning their private backyard conversations into her personal podcast. Fed up with the constant surveillance, the husband decided enough was enough. A brilliant, mischievous idea began to form. With a grin, he sat down and sketched out a comical blueprint, a plan involving a motion sensor and a garden hose, designed for one specific audience member. He knew this was the only way to reclaim their peace. The installation was a covert operation. A quick montage shows him carefully setting up a motion-activated sprinkler, hiding it perfectly within a lush garden bush. He aimed the nozzle with precision, targeting the exact spot along the fence where his neighbor's head would inevitably appear. Right on cue, the trap was ready to be sprung. The nosy neighbor, unable to resist the lure of a nearby conversation, crept silently toward the fence. She slowly raised her head over the wooden barrier, ready to catch every last word, completely unaware of the surprise waiting for her. The moment her head cleared the top of the fence, the motion sensor kicked into action. A powerful, targeted jet of water shot out from the disguised sprinkler, drenching the utterly shocked woman. She sputtered and scrambled away in a comical flurry, dripping wet and completely baffled. From their kitchen window, the husband and wife watched, trying their best to stifle their laughter as their drenched neighbor retreated. The final shot settles on the now peaceful fence line, the small sprinkler head just visible amongst the leaves, a silent, watery guardian of their hard-won privacy. And that's the story of how a little ingenuity brought tranquility back to their yard. My garden was my masterpiece, a vibrant explosion of color and life that stood out in a sea of perfectly manicured, yet sterile, green lawns. It was my sanctuary until the letters started appearing, one after another. Official notices from the Homeowners Association were slapped on my door. Non-compliance, they declared. Violation of community standards. My unique flower bed, my pride and joy, was deemed unacceptable. The sterile uniformity they demanded felt like a slow death to creativity, and I knew I couldn't just stand by and watch my garden wither under the weight of their rules. Frustration turned into action. I took the notices and went door to door, sharing my story with my neighbors. I found I wasn't alone in my discontent. A quiet rebellion began to brew. We spent evenings designing flyers that called for change, our living rooms turning into campaign headquarters. A montage of determined faces knocking on doors and neighbors eagerly signing my petition to run for the HOA board showed a community uniting for a common cause: the freedom to express ourselves, starting with our own front yards. The community meeting was thick with tension. The air crackled as the ballots were counted, each number announced raising the stakes. Then the result: I was elected the new board president. A wave of cheers erupted from my supporters, a stark contrast to the stunned silence of the old guard. It was a victory not just for me, but for everyone who believed our neighborhood could be more than just a carbon copy of itself. My first act as president was symbolic and deeply satisfying. With my neighbors watching, I ceremoniously fed the old restrictive rulebook into a shredder. In its place, I signed a new set of guidelines, one that celebrated individuality and encouraged creative landscaping. The final scene is a testament to our victory. A sweeping view of the neighborhood, now a kaleidoscope of diverse, beautiful, and unique gardens. Our homes were no longer just houses. They were canvases, painting a picture of a community that had finally found its true colors. My neighbor was the kind of guy who thought he owned the whole block. I knew I was in for trouble the day he stood right on our property line, jabbing a finger at my brand new, perfectly legal tool shed. He went on, complaining it was an eyesore and violated some imaginary code he'd cooked up in his head. His smug grin told me he just enjoyed having something to complain about, and my little shed was his new target. That night, fueled by a mix of irritation and coffee, I decided to do a little research. I pulled up the city's official property maps and utility line diagrams on my computer. As I scanned the digital blueprints, my eyes caught something interesting. I zoomed in and then I zoomed in again. A major city utility line, a big one, ran directly underneath the corner of his prized brand new $40,000 swimming pool. A slow smile spread across my face. The next morning, I made a calm, completely anonymous call to the city planning and permits office. I simply mentioned that I had reason to believe a recent construction project might be encroaching on a major utility easement in my neighborhood. I gave them the address and let them take it from there. A few days later, I was watering my plants when a city vehicle pulled up to his house. Two officials got out, clipboards in hand. My neighbor greeted them with that same smug confidence, but it melted away as they unrolled blueprints and started taking measurements around his pristine pool. His face went from arrogant to ashen in about 30 seconds. The final verdict came in the form of an official violation notice, which an inspector handed to my now horrified neighbor. The notice clearly stated his luxurious pool was built illegally over a public utility easement and would have to be removed immediately at his expense. The best part? A week later, a huge cement truck backed into his manicured yard. I watched from my kitchen window as workers methodically filled his expensive poolside oasis with concrete. He just stood there watching his $40,000 investment turn into a useless slab of gray rock. I took a slow sip of my coffee and gave a little nod to my humble, perfectly sited shed. Some people just need to learn to mind their own business. In a quiet suburban street, a seemingly peaceful life was about to be disrupted. Our homeowner discovered a neighbor's shed encroaching, a clear violation of their property. This wasn't just an oversight, it was a deliberate act, fueled by long-standing jealousy. Determined to protect their rights, they began gathering crucial evidence. Old surveys and legal documents became their first line of defense. Initial attempts to resolve the issue amicably were met with stubborn resistance. Realizing the gravity, they sought legal counsel, preparing for a battle ahead. The dispute escalated, turning a neighborly disagreement into a full-blown legal challenge. The path to justice would be long, but their resolve remained unshaken. The courtroom became the arena where their fight for justice unfolded. Expert testimonies and historical records meticulously proved their rightful ownership. Every document, every boundary line spoke volumes in their favor. After intense deliberation, the court's decision was clear and unequivocal. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about the property's true limits. Justice prevailed, affirming their claim and validating their persistent efforts. The neighbors' arguments crumbled, their encroachment undeniable. The court ordered the shed's removal, a tangible victory for the homeowner. Piece by piece, the illegal structure was dismantled, reclaiming lost ground. The neighbor watched, their frustration and defeat palpable. Beyond reclaiming land, the court awarded significant compensation, $50,000, a testament to the damages and legal costs incurred. The land was finally clear, and justice had been fully served. Standing on their reclaimed land, the homeowner felt a profound sense of peace. This story reminds us to always stand up for our rights and respect boundaries. A clear, positive resolution, proving that justice can indeed prevail. He always seemed so friendly, a pillar of the community, but behind that smiling facade was a two-faced, jealous snake. It all started when my neighbor, Mark, began asking for small favors. "Could I borrow your lawnmower?" he'd ask with a wide grin. "Mind if I grab a cup of sugar?" The requests became more frequent, always masked with neighborly charm. I never suspected a thing, happy to help out the guy next door. I thought we were building a genuine friendship, sharing beers over the fence and talking about our weeks. The mask finally slipped one evening when I was watering my garden near our shared fence. I overheard him on the phone, his voice dripping with a venom I'd never heard before. He was complaining about my new promotion, my recently renovated porch, everything. "He thinks he's so much better than us," he sneered. Later that night, my wife found a local online forum where an anonymous user, whose details matched Mark's perfectly, was spreading vicious rumors about me, twisting my kindness into acts of condescension and arrogance. The favors were just his way of sizing me up, looking for weaknesses to exploit. I was furious, but I knew a direct confrontation would just be my word against his, so I started gathering my evidence. I took screenshots of the forum posts and saved a recording from my security camera that caught his rant. The annual neighborhood block party was just around the corner, and I knew it would be the perfect stage. I printed out the most damning messages and attached them to a neighborhood watch flyer, preparing to distribute them when the time was right. As everyone mingled at the party, I casually handed out my flyers. At first, people smiled, thinking it was a genuine notice. Then their eyes scanned the text. A ripple of whispers turned into a wave of shocked gasps. I watched as people turned to look at Mark, whose face went from cheerful to ghostly white in an instant. He was cornered, his two-faced treachery laid bare for everyone to see. He tried to stammer out a denial, but the proof was undeniable. Now a heavy silence hangs over his house. He scurries from his car to his front door, avoiding all eye contact. The other neighbors, who once greeted him warmly, now turn their backs. Justice was served not with a loud bang, but with the quiet, collective shunning from the community he tried to poison. I've since grown closer to my other neighbors, our bonds strengthened by the shared truth. We learned a valuable lesson about the smiling snakes that can live right next door.
You would think that common courtesy would stop someone from repeatedly blocking your driveway, but my neighbor seemed to think his car was exempt from basic rules. For months, it was the same old story. I'd come home to find his sedan parked just enough over the line to make getting into my own driveway a 10-point turn from hell. Sometimes I couldn't get out at all. It was a constant, frustrating puzzle I was forced to solve daily. I tried to be reasonable, I really did. I started with polite notes tucked under his windshield wiper, asking him to be more mindful. When the notes were ignored, I tried catching him in person. He'd either brush past me with a mumbled, yeah, I'll move it later, or just shrug and say he was only there for a minute that often stretched into hours. It became clear that my polite requests were falling on deaf ears. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I had a crucial, career-defining presentation, and I was already running late. I grabbed my keys, rushed out the door, and my heart sank. His car was completely blocking me in, not even an inch to spare. There was no way I was getting out. In that moment of pure frustration, a switch flipped. I was done being Mr. Nice Guy. With a strange sense of calm, I walked back inside, pulled out my phone, and dialed the number for a local towing company. I calmly read off his license plate and described the make and model of the silver sedan illegally blocking my property. The dispatcher said a truck would be there within 30 minutes. Right on schedule, the big tow truck rumbled down our quiet street, its yellow lights flashing. The noise drew my other neighbors out of their homes, their curiosity piqued. They watched, whispering amongst themselves, as the driver expertly began hooking up the offending vehicle. It was turning into quite the neighborhood event. Just as the car's front wheels lifted off the ground, my neighbor burst out of his house, shouting and waving his arms frantically. He pleaded with the tow truck driver, but the driver just pointed to the clear "no parking" sign and my driveway. Defeated and red-faced, my neighbor could only watch in humiliation as his car was hauled away in front of the entire street. I haven't had a parking problem since. My neighbor, let's call him Kevin, had always been a thorn in my side, but I never imagined he'd stoop this low. One afternoon, I saw him on his porch whispering into his phone and pointing at my house with a nasty smirk. A week later, a letter from the city arrived, a fine for a supposed code violation I knew I hadn't committed. It was a baseless complaint, and I immediately knew who was behind it. My suspicions pointed straight to Kevin. His constant glares and petty remarks had finally escalated. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I decided it was time to do a little digging of my own. If he wanted to play dirty, I was ready to play smarter. My quiet investigation began that very evening. From the safety of my second-story window, I started observing his property. What I found was shocking. Kevin had an unpermitted shed built right against the property line, a makeshift deck that was clearly not up to code, and was even running what looked like an undeclared auto repair business from his garage, with cars and parts spilling onto his lawn. It was a goldmine of violations. Over the next few days, I became a private investigator. I documented everything with my phone's camera, capturing clear photos and videos of each infraction. The illegal shed, the rickety deck, the constant stream of clients for his side hustle. I had it all on film, creating an undeniable mountain of evidence against him. With my evidence compiled, I drafted a detailed anonymous report. I attached all the photos and videos, outlining each specific violation and its corresponding city code. I walked into the city planning department feeling a sense of calm justice and submitted the entire package. The ball was no longer in my court. About a month later, I witnessed the glorious aftermath. I saw Kevin retrieve his mail, his usual smug expression slowly melting into pure horror as he read the official notice. Through my binoculars, I could almost make out the number on the paper, a hefty $100,000 fine for his numerous serious violations. His little game had backfired spectacularly, and the sweet taste of karma was better than I could have ever imagined. When my neighbor decided to take his jealousy out on my garden, he made a huge mistake. He couldn't stand that my yard was a vibrant oasis while his was just a patch of sad brown grass. So, one night, he snuck over with a saw and cut down the beautiful, mature trees that lined my property. I woke up the next morning to a scene of total devastation, my lovely trees lying dead on the ground. The sight filled me with a white-hot rage. It was one thing to be jealous, but to destroy something I had nurtured for years was pure malice. I stood there, looking at the wreckage and the smug look on his face as he watched from his window, and I knew I couldn't let this go. But I wasn't going to sink to his level. I was going to get my revenge, and it was going to be epic, legal, and very, very green. My grand plan was simple but brilliant. I spent hours online, researching the fastest-growing trees I could find. I ended up ordering 100 of them, a mix of hybrids that would shoot up in no time. My goal was to build a natural wall, one that would completely and permanently block his view of my property and everything beyond it. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work. Day after day, I was out there digging, planting, and watering. I lined my entire property with the saplings, creating a dense new border. It was back-breaking labor, but with every tree I planted, my anger was replaced by a sense of satisfaction. My green army was taking its position. The results were better than I could have ever imagined. The trees grew at an astonishing rate. Within a couple of seasons, they had formed a thick, impenetrable wall of green, soaring high into the sky. My privacy was restored, and my garden was more secluded and beautiful than ever before. The best part, however, was the look on my neighbor's face. One morning, I saw him staring out his window, his jaw practically on the floor. His precious view was gone, replaced by an endless sea of leaves. He was completely boxed in by my wall of trees. And as I sipped my coffee in my now perfectly private yard, I knew that this was a dish best served cold and green.
I never thought I was the type of person to hold a grudge, but my neighbor, Mark, pushed me to a whole new level of petty. It all began when I drove my brand new gleaming black luxury sedan into my driveway. I saw him peeking through his blinds, and the look on his face wasn't friendly admiration. It was pure, undiluted envy. That single moment was the spark that ignited a war I never wanted, but one I was determined to win. The harassment started subtly. First, it was a passive-aggressive note left on my windshield about parking too close to the line, even though I was perfectly centered. Then came the direct complaints. He'd corner me when I was getting my mail to grumble about the deafening roar of my engine, which, for the record, purrs like a kitten. Soon I heard from others on the block that Mark was spreading rumors about how I must be into some shady business to afford a car like that. It was a relentless campaign of petty annoyances designed to chip away at my peace. One morning, my frustration turned to curiosity when a for sale sign was hammered into Mark's front lawn. A little digging revealed the truth. Mark was in serious financial trouble. He was being forced to sell the house he had lived in for over 20 years. A wave of satisfaction washed over me, but I knew just letting him move away wasn't enough. An idea as shiny and audacious as my car began to form in my mind. This was my chance for the ultimate payback. Working through an agent to keep my identity a secret, I bought his house. The closing was swift. On the final day, I walked up his driveway, the very path he'd used to deliver his petty complaints, and handed him an official eviction notice. The look of utter shock on his face as he realized his new landlord was the man he had tormented was priceless. As he stood there, stunned into silence, my car gleamed in the background, a silent testament to the fact that some grudges are best served cold, with a side of real estate.
Life in our community was peaceful, filled with simple joys. Like a cozy evening by the fire pit in my own backyard, it was a perfect spot for relaxation, a place to unwind after a long day. Until the HOA decided otherwise. A stern-looking HOA president in her 50s-60s appeared, delivering a hefty $4,000 fine for an unapproved fire pit. The fine was outrageous, a clear overreach. But instead of giving up, I saw an opportunity for a legal upgrade. If a simple fire pit was an issue, then a fully approved, elaborate outdoor kitchen would be the perfect solution. The plan was ambitious: a gas grill, a smoker, and even a pizza oven, all meticulously designed to meet every regulation. Weeks turned into months of hard work. I was actively involved, ensuring every detail was perfect, every stone in place. The gas grill was installed, then the smoker, each piece adding to the grandeur of my new culinary fortress. Finally, the magnificent pizza oven took its place, promising countless delicious gatherings. The dream was becoming a reality. With all approvals in hand, the luxurious outdoor kitchen was complete. It was time to celebrate legally and grandly. The first block party was an instant success. Laughter, music, and the irresistible aroma of BBQ filled the air. I served up delicious food, watching my neighbors enjoy themselves. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was a community hub. Meanwhile, the HOA president, from a distance, couldn't help but notice the vibrant party and the delicious smells. She could smell the success and perhaps a hint of her own defeat wafting through the neighborhood. Every weekend became a new celebration. Our outdoor kitchen transformed into the heart of our growing community. From simple gatherings to themed feasts, the joy and camaraderie only grew stronger with each passing week. Looking back, that $4,000 fine seems tiny now. It led to something far greater, a thriving community. Cheers to overcoming petty rules and building something truly special, one delicious meal at a time.
Life had a way of testing John, pushing him to the brink. His once promising future now felt buried under a mountain of debt. Then his wealthy uncle arrived, a stark reminder of his struggles. Impeccably dressed, the uncle surveyed the scene with disdain. He approached John, a cold, judgmental glint in his eyes. With a dismissive wave, he delivered a crushing blow. "John," he declared, "you're officially broke." The words hung heavy in the air, a bitter truth. John felt the weight of his uncle's judgment, a familiar burden. He knew he had to clear out the old tires, a monumental task. Day after day he toiled, moving the heavy, dirty rubber. Each tire was a testament to his dwindling resources. One afternoon, a peculiar tire caught his attention. It was older, more worn, almost forgotten. As he moved it, he noticed a small, unusual slit in its sidewall. Curiosity, a rare spark, ignited within him. He found a rusty old tool nearby and began to pry. A glint of something metallic, then paper, caught the light. With bated breath he reached inside. What he pulled out defied all expectations. Old, crisp, pre-1933 silver certificates. His eyes widened, disbelief warring with dawning hope. He tore open the tire, revealing more stacks. Each discovery fueled his frantic search. Hours turned into a blur of counting and examining. The numbers on the screen climbed higher and higher, until a final, unbelievable sum appeared. $2.8 million in pre-1933 silver certificates. His expression transformed from shock to overwhelming joy. The weight of the world lifted, replaced by boundless hope. Months later, John was a changed man. His fortune had been meticulously authenticated and secured. He had invested wisely, building a new life. Then fate intervened, bringing him face to face with his uncle. The uncle's jaw dropped, recognizing John but not his prosperity. John offered a subtle, knowing smile, a silent retort. He simply nodded, a gesture of quiet triumph. Leaving his uncle speechless, John walked away. His life, once broken, was now a testament to unexpected fortune.
In a quiet suburban neighborhood, winter often brought a serene blanket of snow. But one morning that peace was shattered, not by a blizzard, but by a familiar sound. It was the hum of a snowblower, diligently clearing a homeowner's driveway. For them, it was a necessary chore. For their neighbor, it was an unbearable nuisance. The neighbor approached, demanding silence. "That noise is simply too much, too early." The homeowner, frustrated, couldn't shake the encounter. They knew their neighbor relied on a crucial easement. This easement, a long-standing agreement, crossed their property, providing vital access. It was the neighbor's only way out when heavy snow fell, a true lifeline. But after the complaint, the homeowner began to question everything. They delved into property law. Could an easement be revoked? The answer was yes, under certain conditions. A difficult decision began to form, weighing heavily on their mind. With a heavy heart, but a firm resolve, the homeowner initiated the legal process. The easement would be rescinded. Documents were filed, notices served. The quiet hum of the snowblower had set in motion an irreversible chain of events. Then came the storm. A relentless, heavy snowfall blanketed the entire neighborhood. The complaining neighbor, expecting the usual cleared path, stepped outside. But this time something was different. The easement was gone. The path, once a clear route, was now an impassable wall of snow. They were truly snowed in. Panic set in as the realization dawned. Their complaint had led to this unexpected, isolating consequence. From a distance, the homeowner watched. A complex mix of satisfaction and perhaps regret filled their gaze. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind. The homeowner reflected on the dramatic turn of events. A simple noise complaint had escalated into a profound lesson about property rights and neighborly boundaries. The snow-covered path remained, a stark reminder of a conflict that had reshaped two lives. Sometimes, the smallest disputes can lead to the most unexpected and isolating outcomes. They say you can't fight City Hall, but what about the Homeowners Association? This is the story of one homeowner who took on the Beige Brigade and won, all thanks to a can of paint and a clever loophole. Our story begins with a homeowner, paintbrush in hand, giving their house a fresh, vibrant orange coat. But not everyone appreciated the splash of color. An official-looking letter soon arrived, slapped with a hefty $2,500 fine for an unauthorized paint job. The homeowner stared at the paper, frustration boiling, but then a determined grin spread across their face. It was time to fight back, not with anger, but with brains. Buried deep within the HOA's mountain of bylaws, after hours of painstaking research, the homeowner found it, a loophole. The rules listed pre-approved colors, and among the sea of beige, taupe, and gray, there was one forgotten option, a bright, unapologetic orange. The homeowner's plan was set. They wouldn't just comply, they would comply with style. The house was repainted, this time in the brightest, most dazzling, HOA-approved orange imaginable. It gleamed in the sun, a beacon of defiance in a neighborhood of muted tones. The homeowner's orange revolution quickly went viral, with pictures contrasting their vibrant home against the HOA president's drab beige house. The community was inspired and the HOA was cornered. In the end, victory was sweet. The HOA board, facing a wave of public support for the homeowner, had no choice but to concede at a tense meeting. The fine was dropped. The homeowner stood proudly in front of their brilliant orange house, a symbol that with a little creativity, you can challenge the rules and paint your own path to freedom.